between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. before the sun comes up and the world pulls you outside of yourself. That is the most sattvic time of day to cultivate that goodness. Hoo-hoo! We back with chapter 14, talking that geeky. And today's reflection, man, this explains a lot. This gets down into, what's big these days is personality tests and understanding your personality. The oldest personality test out there is covered in chapter 14 of the Gita. And this chapter, which is called the Yoga of the Distinction of the Three Gunas, gunas being qualities in Sanskrit, talks about the three main qualities that make up every human being. And it's our proportion within each that give us our distinct personalities. 3 qualities, just 3, and a mixture of each. The 3 are Tamas, Rajas, and Sattva. And these parallel to ignorance at the lowest, Tamas, at the lowest sense, ignorance, lethargy. Then you have active, passionate, with Rajas, very active type of people. And then you have the wise, the good qualities within each of us, the sattvic qualities. You also have people that are predominantly Tamas, predominantly Rajas, predominantly sattvic. But like I said, we all have a mixture of all 3. And no one is 100% sattvic. If you're 100% sattvic, as you approach that, just to use the percentage as kind of a metaphor, as you get to 99%, 99.9%. As soon as you get 100%, you're trans-sattvic, you have superseded, you have transcended all qualities. You are a realized soul, according to this philosophy. And this chapter calls us to understand 2 things. 1, the existence of these qualities that exist within each of us, to assess what is our makeup. What are we wired for? Are we wired for passionate activity? Many Americans, myself included, just wired for a whole lot of activity. Can't stop ourselves from taking on a bunch of undertakings, ambition, activity, achievement through doing. Then you have a whole lot of us that are tamasic, wired for just how do I kick my feet up and do nothing? How do I sleep in as many days during the week as I can? In college, I didn't take a single class before 11. And I only had one before noon, which was the 11 o'clock class, like my junior year, because I loved just sleeping in. Very lethargic. And then you have sattvic. You have the highest order of our qualities, which is towards what we ought to do, duty, obligation. Transcending action for action's sake, transcending a desire for or an inertia towards doing nothing. And it is doing all the right things the right ways at the right time. Again, no one is all sattvic. If they are, then they are self-realized soul. And many of us fall in between those bottom 2, but with enough of the sattvic nature to where you click play on a video like this. There are also sattvic times of the day, between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. before the sun comes up and the world pulls you outside of yourself. That is the most sattvic time of day to cultivate that goodness, that sense of obligation and duty, that wisdom. That's the time to do it. You can do it at other times, but that is the time that's most conducive to cultivating a sattvic approach to life. Then you have the rajasic, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., go. From the traffic to hitting that email inbox, to setting up meetings, to pushing projects along. That is the rajasic time period. Then you have tamasic. Tamasic time period is 6 p.m. until 4 a.m. That's when people aren't necessarily moving projects forward. They're trying to just lose their inhibitions, cut, what is the phrase? Let your hair down, let loose, because the rest of the day was so tight, So you're just letting loose, cutting it up with your friends, going out, chugging a 6-pack. And you're like, yeah, tomorrow's problems, that's for tomorrow. And it is obviously the time in which we sleep the most. But this chapter doesn't just outline the existence of the gunas and pushing us to not just understand them, but assess our own proportions. But it also tells us that our natural state is to rise above them. You have this wiring. Everybody has this wiring. In fact, it's a great chapter allowing us to forgive anyone because they're just operating out of their wiring. And there's that old adage, if I were them, I'd be them. If you were that person with that wiring, with those guides or lack thereof, then you would be that person. It's a profound approach to identification with someone that is doing something that you might hate, you might really not like. And yet finding an identification with one, all right, if I were them, I'd be them. If I were wired their way, if I had those temperaments, then yeah, I'd be like them. It's a great backdrop for forgiveness. But the verse that comes to mind from chapter 14 is 23. So 14:23, he who's seated like one unconcerned is not moved by gunas, by qualities, who realizing that only gunas function, is firm and moves not. This verse describes the wise one who understands the role of the gunas, and that the gunas alone manifest themselves in all of the perceived disparate personalities around us. They are just a manifestation, a life driven by these qualities, whatever those person's qualities combine into. And knowing that each person around us is just an expression of their gunas, of their qualities, the wise person becomes unconcerned with others' actions, becomes unconcerned with your own gunas, your own qualities, your own inner temperament and wiring, recognizing, oh yeah, I do have that wiring for that. I have a predisposition or a preference for this or that, but that's all it is. A predisposition, a preference. The wise rise above that wiring. As the Greeks would say, we are more than just our appetites. You might have an appetite for this or that, but can you rise above that appetite? Through the development of the intellect, that inner equipment, the muscle that can actually choose, discern, discriminate one path over another, see the end in the beginning. Can you utilize that equipment to say, yeah, I have a preference for this, but that's not what we're going to do? And can you get to the point where you're completely unconcerned, ungoverned by any of your preferences or pre-wirings? Any appetites? Become unconcerned, wholly unconcerned by them, and be able to act independently of whatever qualities you might have. That is the ultimate ideal. So much easier said than done. But the ideal, that pointer, that compass, it's what gets us traveling north, is showing the way, showing us that ideal. That is today's reflection on the daily Vedantic. We'll see you tomorrow when we jump into chapter 15.